Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this virtual hybrid IEA meeting on clean energy transitions in the Sahel. We are very delighted that all of you, speakers and participants, could join us today. This meeting marks the second phase of the IEA's vast work on clean energy transitions in Africa, focusing this time on the Sahel region. And today, the IEA is launching a report on clean energy transitions in the Sahel region that represents ongoing analysis and engagement with 6 Sahelian countries: Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, and Senegal. And we're very delighted that representatives of these 6 countries are here present with us today. Thank you very much. Today, we're launching a report that takes stock of the region's current energy trends and proposes key policy recommendations as well as pathways forward to reach crucial energy access and development goals. My colleagues will be presenting these results shortly. We hope that these findings will provide food for thought and spark a fruitful discussion among all country representatives and international experts more broadly. Many of you are clearly leaders in this field, and we hope that you will share your experiences, your lessons learned, areas of progress and remaining gaps in order to identify further priorities going forward. Our very special thanks go to our co-host and IEA partner, Senegal. This virtual meeting is organized with the excellent support of the Ministry of Petroleum and Energies of Senegal, and we're very honored that Her Excellency, Ms. Sophia Gladima, Minister of Petroleum and Energy, is with us today to share her remarks. Madam Minister, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. I know this is an exceptionally busy day and that you will actually be represented at 2 IEA events today. So thank you very, very much. We also express our appreciation to you for the great leadership that you've shown by joining our Global Commission on People-Centered Clean Energy Transition. So once again, thank you very much for your close engagement with the International Energy Agency. We're here today as a direct result of the very significant support that we've received from the Netherlands, a very active IEA member state. And in this respect, I'm very pleased with the participation of Vice Minister van der Heijden. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you very much for the support we've received from the Netherlands. The Netherlands really has played a truly key role in enabling the IEA to pursue this particular analysis and support with African countries in accelerating their clean energy transition pathways. So please accept our gratitude. Last but not least, we also thank the focal points of the Sahelian countries with whom we have built fruitful relations and without whom this work would not be possible. We very much appreciate your presence today. We also appreciate the presence of various international and regional experts who've done extensive work on energy in the region and upon which our report intends to build. In this era, we're joining this meeting both in digital and in-person format. Part of our IEA team is in Dakar, together with colleagues from Senegal, Burkina Faso, Chad, Mauritania, Mali, and Niger, while other of our colleagues, experts, and partners are joining the meeting digitally with me here in Paris and elsewhere around the world. And we hope in the future to be fully present in person to build further relations with our African partners. Just a few words about the IEA's work in Africa. Africa's energy future matters to the world. The energy sector can play an integral facilitative role in economic and human development across the African continent. And that's why in recent years, the IEA has substantially increased our engagement with African regional partners and our work in many African countries. The IEA Africa program's priorities include supporting countries with the design and implementation of their own clean energy transition strategies and objectives. Our goal is to provide database knowledge, analysis, and policy recommendations to help inform your decision-making in support of accelerating clean energy transitions across the continent that take into account local dynamics and priorities. So in that light, clean energy transitions are key to Africa's energy future, as highlighted in the African Union's Agenda 2063 strategic framework, due to their central role in supporting the continent's sustainable growth and structural transformation. The IEA aims to support African countries with their energy strategies and practices on clean energy transitions by sharing expertise to enhance data, inform decision-making, and guide policy implementation. Clean energy transitions have also become central to all IEA work going forward and go hand in hand with the achievement of Sustainable Development Goal 7 in Africa. So this year we take stock of current conditions to identify effective pathways to advance clean energy transitions in 6 Sahel countries. Our aim is to help countries accelerate these transitions by providing a snapshot of the energy sector in the region today and analyze where it could go tomorrow to boost economic development and improve Sahelian livelihoods. Our work with Africa continues bilaterally, regionally, and institutionally, and we look forward to taking these relations further and hope to continue supporting Sahelian countries with their energy transitions objectives. We also aim to continue a high-level multilateral dialogue as well by convening the 3rd AUC IEA Ministerial on Energy on the 18th of November later this year, and hope very much that you will be able to join us. So once again, the IEA remains committed to working with policymakers across Africa and around the world to build future energy systems based on the deployment of clean, affordable, and efficient energy so that we can all achieve this transition together. So thank you very much to all of our partners, to everyone who worked so hard on this report, and for all of you for joining us today. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Warlick. Nous voudrions maintenant tourner vers Dakar.
Thank you very much,
Vers son
Mrs.
Excellence,
Warlick.
Madame
Let us
la
now move
ministre,
to Dakar,
Sophie
and I'd like to give
Gladima
the
du
floor to
Sénégal
Mrs.
pour son
Sophie
discours
Gladima
d'ouverture. Madame la
for
ministre, la
her
parole est à vous.
opening speech. You have the floor. Sorry, we cannot hear the minister. The minister's microphone has to come on, please. Sorry about that. What I was saying was, first of all, I'd like to recognize Mrs. Kitty van der Heijden, her Vice Minister of International Cooperation of the Netherlands. Thank you. I'd also like to thank Mrs. Mary Warlick, who is the Executive Director of the IEA. And I would like to say that, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of the international, sub-regional and regional organization, experts and friends. First of all, I would like to welcome and give my thanks to all the participants here, particularly the IEA, for the very fruitful cooperation that we've had since 2019. I'd also like to recognize the co-chair who is here with me. We hope that the other countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Senegal, and Chad, and I'd like to welcome all of them here as well, as they are all the key actors in enabling transitions towards clean energies. And our President of the Republic has actually stated this quite clearly at the United Nations. I'd also like to thank the Senegalese participants who have helped us thanks to the good coordination of Mrs. Fatou Bansou, who worked extremely hard. And I would also like to congratulate the IEA for all the initiatives that have been taken under the initiatives of Fatih Dahol, which enables fruitful technical dialogue to take place towards clean energies and enable the development of our region. I'd also like to thank the Netherlands who have supported us wholeheartedly for in our endeavors and in the organizing of this meeting. First of all, I'd just like to say that the report, which has been carried out by the IEA in cooperation with all the different stakeholders, has come at a timely moment. In fact, countries are facing the same sort of challenges in our part of the world. They have a great deal of potential and are committed to taking initiatives closely with regional and sub-regional goals. I'd like to talk about the excellent cooperation between Mauritania and Senegal in the way in which we share the oil cooperation. Our authorities are fully aware of what is at stake and the importance of speeding up the electrification of our country through our organization so that we can work with Mali and with Guinea. This is with a regional structure so that we can develop this and at the same time keep on the one hand social and economic development and on the other make sure that we fulfill the challenges of preserving our earth. Moving to clean energy is an inevitable step, but we can move in many different ways towards this, and obviously using the most appropriate technology in this way and respecting the environment is of course important. As is stated in the report, there is a small area that seems to have good cover, but there are large areas where the cover is extremely poor. The Paris Agreement, in keeping with the priorities that have been developed by countries, should be respected. Once again, I would like to say this report is extremely topical for every country. It has given clear-cut diagnosis and pathways, and this way be added to the strategies that analysts have developed. I'd also like to talk about the importance in our partnership, which has enabled us to find the right sort of financing, which will allow us to cope with these challenges. It is important, therefore, to make sure that financial contributions is adequate so that our countries are not penalized in any way, and so that our countries can work towards improving the living conditions of our populations, improve governance, also increase the challenges that our young people face in the areas of education, health, employment, and industrialization, and so on and so forth, so that we get lasting social, economic balances in our country and regions. If we had any sort of sharp rationing of oil and gas projects, was halting them merely to move towards clean energies too fast without a proper transition period would be a disaster. I am confident that the results of these discussions of all the participants here will be extremely useful to all of us and will help us to address all these questions concerning clean energy in all our Sahelian countries and in other parts of Africa. I would like to thank all of you again for your kind participation and your attention. And I would like to thank also the Ambassador for being here with us in this room. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la ministre
Thank you
Gladima,
very
pour
much,
votre parole.
Madam
Je
Gladima.
voudrais maintenant tourner vers notre
Let
partenaire
me now
clé dans cette
turn
analyse
to
des
our
transitions
key
énergétiques, les Pays-Bas,
participant
représentés
and
par
contributor,
l'ambassadrice Madame Joan Wigman
the
à Dakar.
Netherlands,
Et maintenant donner la parole à
represented by
Son Excellence
Mrs.
Madame
Joan
Kitty van der
Wigman
Heyde,
in her
vice-ministre
Dakar.
de
And I'd like
coopération
to give the floor to
internationale
Mrs.
du
Kitty
ministère
van der
d'Affaires
Heyden,
étrangères des
who
Pays-Bas.
is the Vice
Madame van
Minister
der
of
Heyde,
International
la parole est à vous.
Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Your Excellencies, of course, Ms. Sophia Gladima, Minister of Petroleum and Energy of Senegal, Deputy Executive Director Mary Woolrick, and the entire IAE team, I would say, and all the distinguished colleagues and friends of energy transition that have gathered around this digital table. First, let me applaud the team that wrote this report on clean energy transition in the Sahel. I mean, to me and to the Netherlands, this report really underlines that global energy transition is a real opportunity. And it's not just a real opportunity in a few countries, it is a real opportunity everywhere. And it's sometimes seen as a cost, but what we see from this report really is that it is a rational choice and that it is a choice that can be done. And I assure you, not just in this report, but also for the long-term future of this energy transition, you can continue to count on the Netherlands as your partner in the Sahel region. As I said, I think the whole worldwide energy transition is a key opportunity to strengthen the entire SDG achievement, to address inequalities, to address gender issues, whilst we are greening the energy system, to deliver universal access to clean cooking, universal access to electricity, while at the same time accelerating that global clean energy transition. And now, having worked in the world of science and research on climate myself for many years before I took on this job, we literally have no time to lose. We are losing the opportunity if we're not careful, and if we do not accelerate, we are losing the opportunity to keep the world of 1.5 degrees temperature rise within reach. Literally, the impacts of climate change are knocking on our doors, and scientists in the IPCC have written it down, and I quote from their report: scientists are observing changes in the Earth's climate in every region and across the entire climate system. It's everywhere, it's here and now. This isn't a distant problem, it's a problem right here and now. And if you look at the report that UNICEF recently wrote, the Children's Climate Risk Index, it clearly argues that climate crisis is a child rights crisis. We are leaving the next generation with a huge problem. And already children in the world right now are exposed, all of them, to at least one climate hazard. That's what we have done right now. The beauty of the IAE Sahel report, I would say, is that it allows us a stark picture of what the world can look like and what the world will look like in a business as usual scenario. If you take the STEP scenario, there will be an astonishing 80 million people without access to electricity and 120 million people without access to clean cooking. So that could be one reality in the Sahel region. It's not the scenario I would like to see. There's another scenario, the Africa Case 2021 scenario, where the entire population of the Sahel will have access to both, and at the same time, achieving that without translating that into higher CO2 emissions, thanks to energy efficiency and thanks to renewables. So the message of this report really is, yes, we can, yes, we should, and that this is a matter of choice. And the choices we take today are the choices that will haunt the next generation. But it can be done in an economically viable way. And as the report also states, that the Sahel really is a resource-rich but an energy-poor region. There is so much potential we can tap into if we are smart and if we collaborate together by investments, by improving in the energy infrastructure. That all will be of the essence for a sustainable future in this region. Doing this in the right way and doing this with a robust energy system will also help the people in the Sahel to cope with the climate impacts right here, right now. It will build a more resilient system, a system that allows them to adapt to climate change. And the Sahel, let me assure you, once again, is one of the priority regions for the Netherlands, because the challenges are huge, but the opportunities for change are there. And between 2019 and 2022, we have committed to 400 million euros to this region across a variety of, I would say, vital interventions to provide a life of dignity, whether that is food security, it is sustainable trade, but obviously also renewable energy and that transition. And let me name just 3 very concrete programs that we work on with you and through you. With the World Bank, for example, we're funding a very large off-grid solar program, the Regional Off-Grid Electricity Access Program, to increase access to energies among communities far out in the rural areas, which then in turn improves economic opportunities. We also focus on the growth of the domestic biogas sector in the region. And really, let me here appreciate the leadership of Burkina Faso in sharing its biogas experiences with countries in the region. And then lastly, we promote access to renewable energy for poor households through results-based financing. I mean, if financing isn't there, simply we will not go fast enough. And this all is part of a Dutch commitment to provide access to renewable energy by 50 million people by 2030. That is about 2.5 times the population of my country. Why do we do this? Because we believe climate change is here and now, because we believe that we must help and we must accelerate the transition, and simply because it is a right of the children of the future, but the people of the Sahel right now, to do this. And I think we should be very, very honest to understand the importance of energy access, not just from a climate perspective, but that this is a facilitator. It is a vector to achieving all of the SDGs. Without access to clean, affordable energy, we can simply not have the economic growth that we need to see, the equitable access to opportunities, and the ecological improvements across a wide spectrum of issues beyond climate change that we need to see. And we cannot solve inequality within and between countries, which is the essence of the SDGs. So the focus for me on the Sahel, the focus on the renewable energy as an opportunity, is the only rational choice for the future. It's a vision we stand for, and we are with you for the long haul. It will not be an easy ride, but it will be an achievement that we together by 2030 will facilitate based on the excellent report. So again, my thanks to the team of the IAE, and I turn it back to you, Madam Facilitator.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Van der Heijden.
Thank you so much, Ms. Van der Heijden.
Madame Van der Heijden,
Thank you, Your
Madame
Excellency.
Notre conférence étant maintenant
Thank you, Ms.
officiellement
Warlick. Our
ouverte,
conference is now
nous
launched.
aimerions présenter les
And so we
principales
would like to
conclusions de
present
cette
to you
analyse
the
que
main
l'AIE a
findings
menée.
of this report
Ce sera
commissioned
présenté
by
par
the
mon collègue
IEA.
Arnaud Rouget à
The findings will
Dakar
be presented
et
by
par
my
moi-même ici
colleague
à
Arnaud
Paris,
Rouget in
une
Dakar and by
présentation
myself
hybride.
here in Paris. It will be a
Cette
hybrid
présentation se fera
presentation.
en anglais et en
This
français, donc
presentation will be both in
permettez-moi
English
maintenant
and in
de
French.
passer
And
à
so
l'anglais.
I will now switch to
Vous voulez
English.
bien. Thank you very much. What we would like to do in this presentation is share some of the key findings that we have found through this analysis on clean energy transitions in the Sahel. This report has been developed over the past year together with country representatives and partners that are here around our digital table today. And the report sheds light on one of the least studied energy regions in the world, trying to provide a snapshot of today's energy sector in the 6 countries of focus, analyzing main key energy trends in the region, and proposing pathways to accelerate clean energy transitions based on the scenarios as Ms. Van der Heijden has just mentioned. We hope that these key findings can provide some discussion later on in the roundtables. So when we look at the Sahel in terms of context, we can observe a dynamic, young, increasingly urban population, as well as trends of fast-growing economies in the past decades. Yet the region also faces certain obstacles that pose challenges for countries' objectives in terms of regional stability and socioeconomic development. Some of these challenges include energy-related challenges, such as a high vulnerability to climate change impact, underdeveloped energy infrastructure, low energy access rates, and this is exacerbated in some situations of conflict that has been present across the region. Yet demographic economic growth also translates towards higher energy demand and opportunity for development. It offers huge opportunities for fast adoption of clean energy systems. By placing the Sustainable Development Goals with the right policies and investment levels, countries can achieve several SDG targets going forward by 2030, including achieving universal access to energy, increasing the share of modern renewables, especially in the power sector, and growing the economy to twice its size today by using only 25% more energy if energy efficiency use is used well. There are challenges to achieving this pathway, including financing issues, exacerbated by COVID-19 and growing climate risks. But what we would like to show is that there is a possibility to overcome these challenges and achieve rapid energy development, energy access, as well as economic growth by controlling the growth of emissions at the same time. Let us show you in which way we'd like to do that. When we look at the Sahel, today it is home to about 100 million people. Its region's economy has doubled in the past 15 years, with GDP growth annually being at 4.7% until 2019, which is a higher pace than in most other regions in sub-Saharan Africa. This has translated into higher energy demand, and the economic development has also led to a higher rate of energy-related CO2 emissions from 7.5 megatons of CO2 in 2000 up to 25. That is still, it needs to be said, among the lowest levels of emissions per capita in the world, somewhat relatable or the same level of emissions as the city of Paris, where half of our team sits here today. When we look forward, the region would be home by 2030 to about 140 million people, 20 million new urbanites. And based on current policies and trends, the economy is set to grow, GDP is set to expand by 90%, leading to a similar increase of CO2 emissions. But as we see, by 2030, 80 million people would still not have access to electricity, and 120 million people would not have access to clean cooking. That is what is described in the STEP scenario that we approach within the report. There is another scenario, the Africa case, again mentioned by Ms. van der Heijden. Our more ambitious scenario envisions a different future. The Africa case achieves SDG 7 by 2030, doubles the economy based on today with a modest growth in renewables. That would still lead today to, that would still represent only 0.15% of global CO2 emissions per capita, again among the lowest in the world. I'd like to turn now to my colleague in Dakar to take this analysis further and more into detail. Arnaud, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, est-ce que
Thank you very much.
les personnes qui sont dans la salle à Dakar m'entendent, je crois? Est-ce que vous pouvez me
People can
confirmer
hear me in the room in Dakar. Can you tell me if you can hear me on Zoom as
Je
well?
pense que c'est bon, alors
I think that everything is okay, and so we'll start now. So now I would like to look at the situation, the energy situation of the Sahel region, because as you can see, this is a resource-rich region, but so far, the energy sector has been underdeveloped. And so if you look at primary demand, for energy in the Sahel, you can see that demand has doubled over the last 15 years. Currently, total primary energy demand is slightly under 1 exajoule. It might seem like a lot, but this is the same primary energy consumption as Nebraska in the United States, even though there are 50 times as many people in the Sahel region. However, demand has grown extremely quickly, 4% per year. However, the level of infrastructure is low. If you look at power generation capacity per capita, there is 35 watt per person, which is a third of what you can see in other sub-Saharan countries. If you look at the energy consumption, you can see 0.2 ton of oil equivalent per capita, which is half the average of African countries and 10 times below the world average. The energy mix in the Sahel region is typical of developing economies. You can see that traditional biomass takes a high share of the energy mix, and fossil fuel make up the rest of demand. However, we can see that there is an increase in clean energy, especially when it comes to power generation. We will come back to this. So this is a snapshot of the situation today. The question we asked in this report is, what will the future look like? And where will current policy lead us? In our STEPS scenario, stated policy scenario, we can see that demand grows by 50% because of population growth, obviously, because people will need more power in the residential sector for cooking, but also in the transport sector. As you will see, the number of cars will increase threefold by 2030. However, as you can see, the energy mix doesn't change much. There is still a large use of bioenergies and oil, as well as other types of fossil fuels. There is an increase in power per capita. However, there are still 80 million people without access to electricity by 2030 in this scenario. And this is why we have a second scenario, the Africa case scenario, that shows that with only 25% more of energy than today, the economy will more than double with an energy mix that is more modern, with more renewable energies, such as solar, wind, and hydroelectricity, and more electrification in final consumption sectors, with households with more appliances consuming more power. And over time, the energy mix decarbonizes. So now I would like to look at the various sub-targets of SDG 7. So let's start with the energy access goal. Access to energy is at the center of the energy policies of the Sahel. If you look at the situation in 2019, you can see that a third of the population has access to electricity and less than 10% have access to clean cooking. So this is for the whole region. And obviously, there are also regional differences. You have to remember that the region started at a very low level, and growth is different depending on the country. Since 2010, 1 million additional people have been connected to the grid. There is more electrification. Major progress was made, especially in Mali, in Senegal and Mauritania. More than 50% of the population is connected to the grid, but there are still challenges. Challenges for the power grid. There's, for instance, the financial health of utilities, and there are also challenges to accelerate the development of the grid. If you look access to clean cooking, the situation is not as good as it is for electricity access. This is the case in all regions of the world. Policies were put in place in Mauritania, especially with LPG. However, population growth has gone much faster than the progress that has been made for clean cooking. So the situation is far from being satisfactory. and there are dire consequences on the environment, on the climate, on population's health, and questions of gender. So what about the policies that can be put in place to improve the situation? With the STEP scenario, at the end of the decade, more than 80 million people would not have access to electricity, and 120 million people would not have access to clean cooking. However, this future is not written in stone, and another path is possible. And so within the IEA, we have used geospatial analysis to look at where the population is and what the best solutions were, the most cost-effective solutions were. And this analysis must be refined with each country in the region. But this analysis has shown that the current power grid, if it is intensified, could connect around half of the people that should be connected to the grid by 2030. And mini grids could connect a third of the population, but grid extension could also go through standalone systems that could be extremely efficient, especially, for instance, in Burkina Faso. For clean cooking, we need to accelerate policies, obviously. And we will need to use a combination of technologies. In rural regions, for instance, there can be clean cooking stoves, but also biogas. And electricity and LPG can also be good solutions. Recommendations and good practices that we have seen have shown that governments can support the development of infrastructure, for instance, for LPG. It is also possible to develop programs to distribute modern cooking equipment to make sure that they are affordable for households. And if you look more specifically to conflict-affected regions and regions with specific challenges, here we have extremely vulnerable population, and here countries must provide long-lasting support so that there is no break in the supply of energy for vulnerable populations. And if you look at the second target of SDG 7, expanding energy, accelerating deployment of renewables, as you can see, the share of renewables was below 2% in 2000. But if you look specifically at power and electricity, you can see that power generation has increased over the last 2 decades. In terms of energy mix, 75% of the power is generated by using oil and heavy fuels, but there also has been a quick development of renewables, which now account for 20% of the electricity generation in the region. For instance, in Mali, there are many dams and generate electricity using hydropower. Wind has been developed a great deal in Mauritania and Senegal. And when it comes to solar PV, generation of solar energy has doubled since 2015. So a very rapid development. Now, if you look at what could happen by 2030, using the stated scenario policy, we are expecting a threefold increase in power production. Oil would still be an important part of the energy mix. There would also be a development of coal-powered energy. There are already projects that are under construction, but the share of renewables would also increase, but would only represent 45% of the energy mix by 2030. Solar energy would develop, for instance, in Senegal, with the decision to join the SFE projects. In the Africa case scenario, electricity generation would increase 5-fold, and there would be a great deal of solar, wind, and hydroelectric energy in the energy mix. If you look at the scenario, we can see that we would need to add 8 gigawatts of solar energy. It might seem like a lot, but it is still less than what the Netherlands have today. And I'm sure that everyone will agree on the fact that the Sahel region is larger and has more sunlight than the Netherlands over the year. So this is possible by 2030. We can also see that there is a development of gas-powered energy in the energy mix by 2030 in the Africa case scenario. So a crucial question in the question of investment. In the Africa case scenario, $3 billion annually would be necessary as investments. This is 2 times as much as what is needed in the STEPS scenario, but compared to what we can see in the rest of the world, this is actually a limited amount. Also, a strong recommendation would be not to look only at production capacity, but also at transmission, distribution, power grids, both at the national level, but also at the regional level, with the integration through energy pools, for instance. The next target has to do with energy efficiency. The indicator we often quite look at is energy efficiency and the contribution of energy in GDP. This is the definition of energy intensity. You will see here the evolution of energy intensity over the years, and you can see that energy intensity is quite low, but there was limited progress over the last few years. It is lower than OECD countries and other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. We can see that in all scenarios, there must be an increase in energy intensity to various levels. In the Africa case scenario, we estimate that we will have to use 15% less energy compared to the STEP scenario. However, this will be an extremely good investment. Energy efficiency is a tool that everybody can use, and it makes it possible to develop efficient systems.
Is this kind of progress something that we can foresee? Because if we look at other regions that have developed recently in the past, we can see that this is a rhythm that India and China managed to sustain for a decade in the past. So there are best practices that we can spot from other regions. Talking about energy efficiency, this can apply to other sectors. Of course, there are many gains to be made in energy efficiency with cooking material. When we go to biomass, modern biomass cooking equipment, if we go to GPL, we can gain 30% in effectiveness and in efficiency, and we can find the same level of gain in transport, in the transport sector. Let's look at it. In 2030, according to the announced policies, we will have 3 million individual vehicles circulating in the Sahel region. So this will increase 2 million TOE, ton of oil equivalent consumption by then. So we don't have very strong energy efficiency sectors for that. If we look at what is being done in the Africa case, there's more activity in effective activity. So we forecast there will be an additional 500,000 vehicles on the road. This will increase the demand for oil, but conversely, there are other trends that are going to bring it down with the efficiency in energy consumption, and we will see that there will be more. There will be increasing number of electric vehicles used in urban centers, and by the end of the decade, they will lay the foundations for the electrification of transportation vehicles. Now, let's look at hydrocarbons. Minister Sophia Gajima touched upon this, and this has been really looked into in the region over the recent years. But if we look back even further, we're talking about a region that has a strong history of production of hydrocarbons, namely in Chad with 100,000 barrels per day since the year 2000. Niger is another big producer, the Magdem oil fields, but there were also other discoveries of oil in Mauritania and others. 1 million barrels in these shared fields. Nangoma would produce a lot by 2024, and there's Grand Tortue that could provide 2.5 million tons of LNG per annum, in addition to other energies. So we expect the production in the Sahel region in Western Africa to increase over the next few years, and that will be in a capacity to meet the demands in oil. If we talk about Niger, there's a pipeline under construction towards Benin for exports and increasing exports. Senegal is thinking about exporting its gas, but also using it in its internal market to generate power via the Cap Beach combined cycle power plant, which is a key instrument for that. So what we expect in our different scenarios is that there be different scenarios for the capacity for supplying different countries with energy. But we can also see risks associated with the different development models based on hydrocarbons, because many countries unfortunately derived annuities from their oil production. So we sometimes mention the Dutch disease, quote unquote, which is like a case study on this type of difficulties. And we can see that there's also high price volatility in oil and gas. So this can generate budgetary difficulties for those states that are based on those two elements of income. And in terms of reducing global emissions, the IEA has worked on scenarios from here to 2050 of net zero greenhouse gas effects. So this is going to generate increased production and increased competition between producers. We have recommendations, cautionary recommendations, and good management through transparency. And we call upon all countries to diversify their economies and to be very precautious and very cautious in the way they manage their resources. We look at mining. We can see another industry that has high potential, it is fully compatible with energy transition, and that is the minerals and metals. The region is very rich in gold, but there's also copper used in electrical systems. There is zinc, which is a mineral used in wind turbines, titanium, Senegal produces it, as well as manganese. All of these minerals are going to be used more and more. We can see here the copper historical supply and projected demand. You can see the supply and the demand in SES, and in a scenario of sustainable development scenario, where we expect everybody to be carbon neutral by the middle of the century, this is going to create new opportunities for the countries that have those resources. So Alain, I will give the floor back to you to discuss the financing.
Thank you very much, Arnaud. To conclude, we'd like to end on a few notes on financing indeed, because the great question is, of course, how do we get there to the Africa case scenario? So what's going to be key here is, of course, increasing energy investment in the Sahel. International finance flows, especially concessional finance, will play an important role, but so will domestic policies on the ground, which obviously sizably influence investment decisions. And the international community has an important role to play in increasing these investment flows. Higher funds are needed. Arnaud mentioned this already. By our IEA estimates, $100 billion pledged today are insufficient to realize the levels of spending needed in developing countries globally. In the Sahel alone, Arnaud mentioned it, the Africa case would see up to 3 billion annually needed by 2030 in the electricity system investments, which is more than twice as much as what we see in current policies today. Building energy infrastructure is a needed first step to unlocking that economic vision in the Africa case, building new industries, rural economic development, tapping into the mineral wealth as well, requires reliable access to electricity and strong transport infrastructure, as Arnaud mentioned. Delivering these investments will require, in turn, supporting policies in the region, government policies for de-risking investments and setting a clear infrastructure plan with dedicated monitoring and evaluation systems are important indicators for investors to follow. And then connecting those policies to SDGs also play a huge role to make regions attract that finance that is needed from all actors across the international finance world, from multilateral development banks all the way to private companies. The economic development follows from there, from these investments, with clean energy investments shown to create numerous jobs, for example, and provide a clear entry point to formalizing and developing a skilled workforce. And these in turn develop further, economically speaking, enhance stability and lessen strains on the most vulnerable populations within their societies, helping countries to become more resilient across these sectors. So when designed well, clean energy policies have proven politically favorable in many parts of the world by enhancing the livelihoods of many, providing safe and gainful employment and paving the way for rapid economic development. The IEA, to conclude for real, remains an eager partner for all countries around and across the continent to help with data enhancement, capacity building, low carbon analysis and roadmaps, and identifying further solutions that help countries better engage with financiers and tap into the finance that will very much be needed, as well as the policies to attract that. By this, we conclude the presentation. Thank you very much to Arnaud. And if you'll allow, I will switch back to French to go towards the remainder of the agenda. Nous espérons donc que ces conclusions clés vont alimenter et ouvrir la voie aux discussions à venir. Je vais donc maintenant céder de nouveau la parole vers Dakar, vers Arnaud, vers les points focaux nationaux qui ont été absolument indispensables, absolument clés pour arriver à cette analyse macro et regarder la région plus en profondeur. Il est donc temps de discuter de cette perspective nationale. Arnaud, et c'est à Dakar, la parole est à vous.
Arnaud in
Merci.
Dakar, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Alors, effectivement, on a un premier panel qui va nous
We
permettre
have a first panel speakers, which will allow us to go into further detail of the transition to cleaner energy in the Sahel region. And we have the great pleasure of having with us a representative of every single one of the 6 countries in the region. Madame Aida Siko from Burkina Faso, the National Agency for Renewable Energies and Energy Effectiveness. Mrs. Beatrice Mintigena, the Ministry of Oil and Energies of Chad. Mr. Ouma Alassane Marika, from Mali. Mr. Brahim Abdallahi from the Ministry of Oil of Mauritania, Madam Fatmata Malakiari, Ministry of Energy from Niger, and lastly, Madam Fatou Tamso, Ministry of Oil and Energies of Senegal. Please activate your camera on the computer so we can see you. And after that, you'll be able to activate your microphone whenever necessary so that everybody can hear you from this room in Dakar. We have a bit under an hour to listen to what you have to say on what was presented in our report and to discuss the different policies that were set up. There seems to be an echo. The politics that were set up in every single country. The idea is to see which kind of tools, concretely speaking, which were used by who which players and what are the challenges remaining. I suggest we move along according to the targets of Sustainable Development Goal number 7. We'll start with access to energy and access to clean cooking, because that, I think, is a point of focus. We saw the figures in the region. There's only 10% of the population that has access to power. Of course, the demography has grown faster than the measure, but there are policies already in place that have started being fruitful. And now I will give the floor to Mr. Brahim Abdullahi from Mauritania. So the measures which have been deployed for providing GPL in cities, and what are the measures in place already from now to 2030? Over to you, Mr. Abdullahi. You'll have to unmute your microphone. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the agency, International Energy Agency, for the efforts provided to develop our sub-region. When talking about developing the energy sector, this is a very important economic driver that has an impact on all other sectors of life, the economic life. I would like to say that in Mauritania, because we're mostly desert country and a very large country, we have very few natural resources. With the increasing desertification since the 70s, the state in Mauritania has set up a certain number of programs since the 90s. These programs are meant to preserve whatever is left of our natural resources. The programs have allowed us to improve the penetration of GPL at national level. Right now, the situation is the following. We have roughly 80% of households in rural areas that use wood or coal for cooking, with a national rate of penetration of GPL of roughly 40%. The programs, what they've allowed to do, these programs, of course, are have been made possible by substantive subsidies made by the state for providing access to gas. And these programs have allowed us to improve the situation. Of course, in addition to the capital in Nouakchott, it went to 24% penetration of GPL. There seems to be a huge echo. In 2020, the company has 3 companies of distribution have distributed 70,000 metric tons all over the country of LPG. I mean, that is very important. Just to give you a few figures, a 12-kilogram LPG bottle costs roughly 7,850 euros. The interpreter is not sure about the figure. This is a very encouraging situation. And we believe that with the discovery of the GTA gas, GTA, we're going to give production to the production of electricity with a combined cycle power plant of 2,400 megawatts. And we're going to reserve part of the gas for domestic uses. I think this is roughly everything I wanted to say on this matter. It is very important for Mauritania and for the state, and the programs are going to carry on being implemented until we meet the declared objectives for 2030, that we will have 100% of the urban environment and 50% of the rural environment covered. Talking about the penetration of LPG gas. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur Abdallahi.
Thank you, Mr. Abdallahi. These are ambitious objectives. And I remember the figure of 50% access to LPG in rural areas. For the remaining 50%, there might be other solutions implemented with the biomass. But now I'm going to give the floor to Madame Tiamiso from Senegal, because they have set up programs for providing possibilities for cooking, enhanced possibilities. And this has reduced the consumption of biomass. And I think you have very ambitious objectives. Can you tell us more about that, Madame So, about the biomass?
Merci beaucoup, Arnaud. Bonjour à tous. Merci également à l'AIE pour ce rapport et pour la co-organisation de cette conférence. Donc, effectivement, avant d'en arriver à la biomasse, très tôt, le Sénégal a été conscient de la
Before going to biomass, Senegal was very aware of the importance of having a lasting supply. And in the study, there are at least 3 countries in the area that are concerned by this. Most of the energy consumption is mainly wood or charcoal for cooking purposes. The governments have set up policies to reduce the consumption of biomass, as our colleague from Mauritania has said. And Senegal has also put another policy in the past few years to enable people to use gas in urban areas. And we have seen that there is a good cohabitation in rural areas and in urban areas of biomass, but also biogas, butane. In the urban areas, this is widespread, but also in rural areas. So as I said, in both areas, there's a mix of the 2 sources, which are used also to our traditional ways of cooking. And this is because of wood and charcoal, which is used regularly in cooking methods. As you also said, the final energy consumption in Senegal is 31% for wood and charcoal for biomass. If you look at as the rest of the country, this represents approximately 70%. And this is in keeping with the programs that have been introduced by the World Bank and others, and the GZ. This means that it has been possible that 2 million households have had an improved situation. So in Senegal, we have to concentrate on equipment, improve it so that the consumption of these different fuels can be improved. Senegal has also developed a national domestic biogas program, and thanks to this, more than 2,000 cubic tons have been made available, and we hope to continue doing this. This is an important way of progressing, and the aim of Senegal is to make it possible for its population to have a sustainable access to this form of fuel. We use these sources also in small industry, small processing industry. Butane is also used in these sectors. Therefore, it's important to study other uses as well, not merely cooking or household uses. In many of these countries, the very small companies and enterprises are in homes, and therefore these sources of fuel can also be used for the processing or whatever industry or whatever activity that household actually has. So these are the comments I wanted to make about the subject. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Madame Sow, pour votre
Thank you.
éclairage sur,
Thank you very much,
ces
Ms. So, for these additional comments on biomass.
Alors maintenant, je voudrais qu'on se tourne sur l'accès à l'électricité. Peut-être
Let's now talk about access to electricity. Perhaps we could hear from Niger. Niger has approximately a surface area of 1.3 square kilometers, and access to electricity for the population is still low. The aim is to increase this access, not up till 2030, but in the following decade. So, Mrs. Falmata Mala, could you perhaps talk to us a little more about access to electricity in your country? Sorry, we cannot hear the speaker.
Okay. C'est bon. Ok. Ok, merci, monsieur Arnaud.
Thank you.
Merci
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnaud. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you very much for helping the Sahel countries. I'd like to thank the IEA. Now, as far as Niger is concerned, we have a very access of 15%, which is very low. Most of the population is in rural areas. When you look at the geography of the country, 80% of the country is rural. So access to electricity is really limited. To develop this and boost this, our country has many different projects or programs to enable the rural areas to become more electrified. To achieve this, we have a new strategy. The strategy is accompanied by a national policy. So I will explain the main lines of the national policy, and in the national policy of Niger 2025, the idea is that electricity will become one of the dynamic sources of development, and will make it possible for the country to develop. As far as our resources are concerned, we have oil, crude oil, and we have coal, with which we produce electricity. We also have natural gas, which comes from the oil mines as well. So we can see that this is used mainly in the crude oil development area. So it's used mainly in that area for its own consumption. The Niger government has undertaken many different projects and programs to extend the Niger-Lek network and grid to enable better access. As I said, it was 15%, and they want to get to 80% by 2035. To achieve this, as I said, the idea is to extend the Niger-Lek network and grid. There's also the electrification of neighborhoods that are not connected for the time being, and to use solar access, solar energy as well. We also have individual solar kits, and this means that some households can receive the solar energy kits. All of this is in the rural areas. In urban areas, the access is 80%. So these are the projects that we have also planned. Now, also to make it possible for electricity to be accessible at many different levels, we also have a role developed multi-role platforms. Nigelec is the national electricity company. It is the national distributor of electricity. But there are areas that do not have access to the grid. So the multifunctional platforms are slightly different. Now, as you know, the Niger is mainly a farming community, an agricultural country. And these multifunctional platforms are installations that exist in areas where there is no electricity. They are connected, therefore, to generators and can be used to charge telephones or batteries, torches, or lamps. So it's a form of electrification. It's a multi-level, electrification. It's not full electrification, but it enables people to charge their phones and charge their lamps. So it's a form of giving them cover. This is what we also have. We've also planned on promoting the solar kits. Yes, thank you. I'd like to react to that. We see that Niger has many different solutions and technology. Concerning the solar kits, I think it would be a good idea to perhaps give the floor to Mrs. Siko from Burkina Faso, because I think the National Agency for Renewable Energies in Burkina Faso has undertaken a very ambitious project on solar energy and has proposed that special steps be taken to actually have quality control and also the actual distribution. Also, those that collect data on her solar kits has really developed very fast. Could you talk to us about this, please? Thank you very much for giving me the floor, Mr. Rouget, and I'd like to thank the IEA for having helped us in drafting this report. It's going to allow us in the long run to use the data and enable us to receive funding and also funding from our own governments, first of all, so that we can achieve the development goals, the sustainable development goals. Now, to react to what Mr. Arnaud said, we have a project which is called Backup, Solar Backup. It was launched by the Ministry of Mines and Quarries in 2019, and it uses the idea of moving towards renewable sources of energy. The idea is that households and small and medium-sized companies or enterprises can actually have access to electricity. The project is really aimed at rural areas again. In fact, Burkina Faso, as in many of the other Sahel countries, we have a very low electricity cover. 80% of our population is in the countryside and rural areas, and so it's extremely difficult to have access. And this is because of the concentration of all the grids in urban areas. So solar backup, this program was launched in 2019. It is a project where the ministry, which has enabled the minister, has been able to choose 4 private operators. And the idea is that they should acquire equipment and install the equipment in households and SMEs. that have been chosen by the local authorities. So in fact, you've got to apply for this, and this is done through our agency. We receive all the potential subscribers. We check the quality of the equipment that is going to be provided by the operators. And we check this before it is actually installed by the different operators. After that, we make sure that the installation is in keeping with the different standards. The advantage is that local populations can actually pay over a period of 3 years. And after that period, they would actually own their own installation. So the project has been very successful. The pilot phase was very successful. And so now we have started the second phase where there will be many more kits distributed. As I said, there are many different sorts of kits. There's what we call the solar home system, which is approximately 60 watts. And then other kits that go up to 3 kilowatts. Given the success of this project, we are going to step up and launch it. Now, we have many other projects as well, which enable access to different sources of energy in rural areas. There's a second one, called ILEN, which enables electrification with small power stations, which can cover approximately the requirements of 50,000 inhabitants. There are also electricity cooperatives that have been set up in rural areas. Here, once again, the aim is to have access in the rural areas. Simultaneously, in 2019, we also launched the solar backup training program for 5,000 young people in the 13 different regions of Burkina Faso. So given the fact that all these installations were set up, it's obviously important to have qualified workers who can work on the maintenance and the running of these different installations. It's important to have repairers, installers, operators, and therefore we have worked with 5,000 young people, and we have trained them how to learn how to use these different systems. And this way, it'll be possible for them to have access to electricity in rural areas. And there are other projects of the same sort that are underway. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Siko. So it's true, there's a whole range of projects. One of the subjects that you mentioned was the financing. And you've said that it was important for households to have access to these things by paying in a staggered way. And I'd like to now turn to Chad and talk to Beatrice Ndigane, who could perhaps talk to us about her country's projects, where there's also certain installations that have been set up and steps taken to enable access. Thank you very much. I too would like to thank the director of the IEA and her team for the wonderful opportunity that this report has given us in sharing our experiences. I would also like to share with you an example of best practice that we had in Burkina Faso and that we are working on in Chad, that we have adopted in Chad. In 2019, Burkina Faso launched a project. It was a pilot project to develop connections to the grids in Burkina Faso. And thanks to this project, more than 200,000 households were enabled to have access to electricity. And therefore, in Burkina Faso, 200,000 people actually asked for the connection. But thanks to so many people responding, in fact, the cost of the connection came down. And we have realized that thanks to this, it was possible, therefore, to be connected to the national grid. In fact, what happens is that the individuals receive a meter which has been calibrated, and this enables them, therefore, to put a down payment initially, but then afterwards to pay the rest later on. And we thought this was a very interesting project so that we could enable more people in Chad to have access. So as we have a platform between us of best practices, here's one example of where we have learned from our colleagues. And in Chad, we wish to adopt the same project. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Mtigina. And we think that this is excellent news, and we think that this sort of dialogue and exchange is really very useful. Now, to conclude on the issue of electricity, I'd like to go back to our colleague from Senegal, where the level of electrification is 60%. And the aim is that there should be universal access before 2025. And this is, so perhaps you could tell us a little more about these projects and also the challenges that you're going to be facing and the steps that you are going to be taking.
Thank you very much. Indeed, universal access is one of the priorities of the energy strategy of Senegal. As you have said, the electrification rate of Senegal is 70%. This is the result of combined efforts undertaken over the last few years to give access to all people in Senegal to electricity. It is true that SDGs have set a goal of universal access to 2030, and Senegal's goal is universal access in 2025, and it shows that there is a real willingness to reach universal access, because access to electricity has an impact on all other goals. For instance, all the socioeconomic goals that we have. We will not be able to reach our goals by 2030 if access is not given before 2030. And so this is a choice that we have made to accelerate the process. We have chosen a date that is earlier than the date of the SDGs. It is a strategy that was taken by Senegal. To reach this goal, we know it will be difficult. This is an ambitious goal, and so the government has been mobilizing a great deal of funding. Rural electrification in Senegal is the challenge, and there is a lot of fund that has been allocated by the government. An operational program was created and that brings together all projects that will make it possible to reach this goal of universal access by 2025. The operational plan is based on technological neutrality, on power grids and HHS technologies. We have planned to have 61% through the power grid, 7% by mini grids, and 30% by other systems. For rural electrification in Senegal, only 7% of people are connected through individual systems. And this also has to do with land management. In Senegal, as with many other Sahel countries, we're facing the same issues. There is a problem having to do with how dispersed households are in some regions. So in some regions, it is much easier to create solar home systems and personal grids. But 61% of households will be connected to the main grid. Another point is to mobilize funding. And earlier this year, an event was organized, a roundtable with all partners to gather funding. So we know that the challenge to reach our goal is to be able to quickly implement all of our projects. And so it means that we need to have the necessary funding to be able to reach that goal. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. So. It was extremely interesting to see that universal access is actually a prerequisite for other strategic goals of Senegal. You have talked about the power grid, and now I would like us to look a little more into the capacity of renewables and the share of renewables in the region. And so I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Maiga from Mali. As we have said, when we observe the energy mix in the region, Mali has the highest share of renewables, the Natafali and Medu dams, and the use of the Senegal River. New dams are planned, if I'm not mistaken, but there is also a development of solar PVs. Could you give us an overview of the situation and tell us a little more about the goals you have over the next few years for your country when it comes to renewables?
C'est bon? Ok. Ok. Ça peut aller? C'est parfait. Ok, d'accord. Donc, je disais bonjour, c'est Oumar Alassane.
So, good afternoon. I'm Mr. Maiga from the General Directorate for Energy. So I work mostly on hydro energy. So we'll talk mainly about this. And if I have time, I will say a few words on the other solutions Mali is considering alongside hydroelectricity. So to reach universal access in our country, we have been setting goals. By 2030, we want to reach 80% of electrification in the population and 100% electrification rates in urban areas. To reach these goals, we need to use various solutions, and various solutions were considered by Mali. So this includes public lighting and energy efficiency, but there are also questions having to do with the development of power plants. And since I'm mentioning power plants, I'd like to say that hydroelectricity currently represents a large share of the energy mix of Mali. We already have two major dams. We have the Manantani power plant, and we share its production with other countries in the sub-region, because Senegal and Mauritania also share the electricity produced. There is also the Filo Dam. We use 45% of the production, and the total production is of 60 mega. So this is the current situation, but we will have to look to the future. And so there is the Guina power plant with 100 megawatts. I think that this project is doing well. In a few months, it will be implemented. So this is what I wanted to say for hydropower. But alongside the development of hydro power plants, we have decided to develop micro hydroelectricity plants. We have a project here. Studies have been commissioned, and we are planning to develop capacity. By 2022, we want to increase capacity, and this will make it possible to reach a capacity of 15,000 tons of oil equivalent. So this will be implemented soon, but as I said, most of the power generation comes from hydroelectricity. We're trying to identify sites that can be used, and we're actually designing feasibility studies for sites that have been already identified. So this is what I wanted to say when it comes to hydropower. However, I cannot tell you everything about all of our programs because we are also planning to use other projects and other sites, but I do not have all the information about this. Now I'd like to talk about solar energy that is being developed in Mali. Currently, we have a solar power plant of 50 megawatts in Kita. It has already been built, it is already being used, but we have also signed 5 conventions for the development of solar power plants. And these power plants will have a capacity of 50 megawatts or more. So if we want to develop all these sites in the short run, we will have to move fast, but we will have a very good energy mix. So these are the projects I wanted to mention, because I don't know when the convention will be signed exactly, but soon there will be implementation. We also have a potential partnership that we are considering for solar. But we also have other potential projects. Some partners have contacted us, and we will have more information about new projects in the following days. So I don't want to talk for too long, but this is an overview of what is happening in my country. And if you have any question, do not hesitate. Thank you so much, Mr. Maiga. It's very interesting to see how various energy sources are being developed. So solar, hydropower, and energy from waste. We might talk about wind a little later on. We will ask questions about this to Mauritania, but now I'd like to talk about regulations and necessary reforms to have a higher share of renewables in the energy mix, and to also have private companies participating in the electrification of the countries. And so I'd like to give the floor to Chad, to Ms. Mdigwena. Could you quickly tell us about the reform that made it possible to open this market to other stakeholders and independent companies? Yes, thank you so much. Here, I'd like to say how important it is to have reforms in this sector. In Chad, at the time, we had a law that had been passed and that hadn't any reform included. And this law was reformed, and there was liberalization of the sector, and we were able to include various partners and private entities. So if we want to accelerate the energy transition, and if we want to develop renewables, I think that we really need to create fertile ground for investors to participate. They must be reassured that their investments will be well used. So having a framework is important. Such a framework will make it possible to manage the program and to solve all the issues having to do with investment, with access to funding, but also to regulate the renewables sector, which is an extremely complex sector. So we have experienced the impact of having a regulatory framework, and this is what I wanted to emphasize. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Mendigena. This is extremely important for the development of new capacity. It is important to have reforms. And there is a topic we might be able to talk about quickly, having to do with national utilities. In Africa and in the Sahel, national utilities are struggling to recover costs. Efforts have been made in Niger. So could you tell us a little more about these measures, Ms. Mala? Thank you very much for this question. Before going into detail on the fight against fraud when it comes to electricity, it is important to note that Niger has developed a plan to have various power plants, solar power plants and gas power plants. And so in addition to the Melmaweza power plant, a new power plant has been commissioned. So from a PPP project, and we have this new power plant, which is a solar power plant. We also have a dam project with a capacity of 130 megawatts. The Kandaji Dam. So this dam will give us a capacity of 130 megawatts. But to come back to the issue of unpaid electricity and debt collection, it is important to note that there is not only debt, but there's also a lot of fraud, because one client might have a meter, but multiple people might be connected to one meter, and this is a problem. And so to solve this issue, our utility company has created pay-as-you-go meters. So when you subscribe, you have access to a new pay-as-you-go system. So how does it work? The meter is put in your home, and you can actually recharge a card. And when the value has been used, the power is cut. And this is one way we have been able to deal with electricity fraud. Thank you, Ms. Mala, for this very tangible example. And now I'd like to talk about energy efficiency. And so I'd like to give the floor to Burkina Faso, to Ms. Siko from the ANRA. Could you tell us a little more about the initiatives that were put in place for buildings, for instance, but also for products, because energy efficiency is a concept that must be implemented in all sectors? Yes, thank you for this question. Indeed, in Burkina Faso, we want to have a lot more energy efficiency, and so we have created an agency especially for energy efficiency. This agency manages renewables and energy efficiency projects. It is important to emphasize the importance of energy efficiency. Generating power is not enough. We need to be able to use power rationally and intelligently. So in Burkina Faso, we have created a regulatory framework for energy efficiency. Many bills were voted in that direction. For instance, there is a decree on consumption levels. So there is a threshold above which there is a mandatory energy audit for the consumer. If so any type of company or building goes over this threshold, there is an audit, and the agency is in charge of managing the audit and to enforce this regulation. So at our level, based on this decree, we have created an order to manage the various audits that will be conducted, because we have seen that on the ground, many organizations had to undergo an audit, and our agency was not able to carry out all the audits. We will carry out a large number of audits every year, but we have a certification program for private entities so that they can carry out audits in our name. And so our agency, the ANERE, has created a plan for these audits. We have created awareness raising programs for various stakeholders, for all organizations that might have to undergo these audits. But we have also reached to private organizations that might be interested in conducting the audits. And I'd like to say that currently this plan is operational. And I'd like to say that we have created a committee that will give the certification for audits to private companies. And we have identified all the structures and organizations that will be submitted to these audits. We have sent them information. And currently, energy audits have started in Burkina Faso, and we are the ones in charge of controlling all this. In addition to energy audits, we're also working on quality control for solar equipment to improve energy efficiency. So for solar equipment, we are operational. The agency is in charge of controlling all the solar equipment entering Burkina Faso for energy efficiency. Because in 2013, we had a finance law that removed the VAT on solar equipment to incentivize the use of solar equipment. And after this law was passed, a lot of solar equipment was brought into the country. However, many of these devices do not meet our standards, and final consumers are not satisfied. And this is why the ministry has given us this role of quality control of all solar devices. And so now when an importer wants to bring solar devices, before the equipment is brought to Burkina Faso, they have to go through us. And currently, we're organizing controls over documentation, but over time, we will improve this control process to make sure that the devices that are brought in our country are up to the standards that have been set in Burkina Faso. And if everything is okay, we give a conformity label, and this allows them to remove the VAT on their devices. So this is what we have been doing for energy efficiency.
On peut rester sur ce sujet des produits parce que ça permettrait de faire le lien avec le Sénégal, parce que je crois que sur les...
No, sorry to interrupt you, but this could be a good link with Senegal, talking about a certain number of pieces of equipment and electrical equipment. Senegal has taken on new measures, and maybe I could give the floor to the next speaker to tell us about all of that. Yes, thank you very much. Energy efficiency is certainly part of our priorities and of the energy policy in Senegal. It rolls out according to different axes, and the main one being reducing the public expenditure in electricity, effective lighting, but also setting up and using effective equipment. I would like to mention the project Equifridge, talking about or being the epitome of energy efficiency. This is a initiative led by ECOWAS that Senegal is one of the pilot countries for. And talking about power consumption for fridges accounts for 19%, of power consumption. We know that in our countries, the households are those that consume the most power. So having an impact on fridges that allows us to reduce or to improve the energy efficiency. 100,000 fridges are deployed every year, and I think this program will allow us to deploy 50,000 fridges per year and thereby to save on power. In the field of transport now, we know that if we look at the consumption per sector, after households, we have transport. Transport is the greatest consumer in the second position. So transport, I mean, trying to bring it down. Enhancing the energy efficiency allows us to reduce the expenditure of transport. In Senegal, we have an agency in charge of mastering energy efficiency in all sectors, across all sectors. Today, all of these sectoral policies are interconnected, are integrated. Senegal is implementing a project of buses and fast buses in Dakar, the capital city, and this will certainly have an impact on future projects because that infrastructure is an infrastructure that will cater or cover the whole capital. And it will have a very positive impact if we can relate the energy consumption of the transport sector and the other programs. This will certainly have a greater impact. There's also another project of express regional train line. And beefing up public transport is certainly something that goes in line with the measures implemented by the energy sector to all of this to meet the ODDs and the objectives of energy efficiency. Thank you so much, Madam So. Generally, we say that energy efficiency is the number one of energies and the first efficiency that countries aim for in all countries. So because we have less than 5 minutes, I would like to move to another topic and move on to Mauritania. We talked about renewable energies and we heard some talk about green hydrogen. I think we have a very exciting prospects in Mauritania. Can you tell us more about it? Mr. Abdallahi, you have the floor. You need to deactivate your microphone. I think I need to wear the headset to hear you as well, but anyway.
Donc, je voudrais dire que l'emplacement.
I would like to say that the geographical location of our country, of Mauritania, on the Atlantic Ocean, with 700 kilometers of coastline, and located in an area in which the speed of wind is over 10 meters per second, over 100 meters. It's an ideal location for producing power, producing electricity from wind power with wind turbines. So the south site, wind turbines between Church and Ouagadougou is a world premiere from the point of view of the potential it has for producing power from wind. With our new national strategy, we are developing what is called green hydrogen. This means that the hydrogen is produced on clean energy. It is either wind energy or solar energy. It is called clean because the reduced cost of the energy used to produce it has a competitive cost price. So we already have framework agreements which we have passed with international companies, CWP from the USA, to develop and install capacity, 60% wind power and 30% solar power of 30 gigawatts. Funding, an estimated funding of $40 billion. Well, only 3 days ago, we signed another MOU for a framework agreement with another company. And this other company is going to develop an important tap, an important part of wind energy for an extra 10 gigawatts. All the studies and all of have been completed, and the construction work is going to begin before the end of the decade. Globally speaking, I mean, this is the largest site or program for a site on Earth. I think it's certainly going to change the situation for our country and in the region, certainly. Thank you very much, Mr. Dalahi, for telling us more about the project. Will be certainly very interesting in following it or following its evolution. And the combination of wind energy and solar energy in Mauritania are excellent and are ideal for the production of hydrogen. I'm terribly sorry because I have the next roundtable that's about to begin, but I'm going to give the floor to last speaker, Madame. So, Ms. Would you like to tell us about the developments of hydrocarbons and how they can support the development of the whole energy system, generally speaking? And then after you, I will give the floor to Chad. Madam Sir. Well, indeed, for a few years ago, Senegal has discovered resources in gas, and our strategy now is that these resources cannot give way to a limited access to energy. I mean, the whole population needs to have free access to energy. So the first or the initial impact of these energies and these discoveries would be to allow equitable access to all the people to this source of energy so that they can make the best use of opportunities. And to do so, we set up a strategy that is based on an energy mix between gas and renewable energies. Of course, these resources are also necessary for us to develop our economy, because our challenge today is to go from a non-developed country to a developed country. And I think that all of the countries that have resources put these resources or make these resources available to their countries and to their populations. And this is to repeat what was said by my colleague. So the resources we have now will allow us to accelerate the development of our economy and improve the quality of life of our population. Thank you so much, Madame So. I'm going to give the final word to Madame, or rather Chad and Madame Menji Guena. We exchanged quite a lot in preparing the forums on the different measures and on the financing needed, but the data is at the basis of our analysis. Can you tell us what your point of view is on the needs you haven't what allowed you to implement the policies, talking about reliable data all the way to the financing of the projects. I think this will be a good transition. Thank you very much. I'm going to go very fast. If we try and look at the conclusions of the energy transition analysis, we have a few recommendations to give our decision makers. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the decision makers, and if I were to decide to implement the recommendations, I would say that I would need to have the support of the International Energy Agency. So over and above what the agency is doing in collecting data, in analyzing them and providing suggestions or recommendations, I think the agency can go even further and work with the decision makers in the field. You will probably remember that all of the elements of data that that allows us to conduct the analyses. I think these data are mostly estimates, or in most cases, they're estimates. But in order to give reliable responses, I think the agency needs to go along with decision makers in the field, in the collection of data, in the building of capacity. And if we have any suggestions to make or any recommendations, I think this transition that we're talking about is probably going to make things slower. So that was one of my concerns that I wanted to express in view of the discussions we had and the analyses carried out. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Mendigena. We fully agree on the diagnosis, and we need to go further. I mean, we need to go more in the field and to make sure that the calculations and estimates are reliable. Sometimes we need to call upon statisticians in the different countries and ask them for data. I know there's a lot of, I mean, there's room for improvement for international institutions. And regarding the financing now, this is what we're going to discuss in our second roundtable. We're going to listen to the speakers of the next roundtable. But before that, I would like to thank all of you speakers to this roundtable. Thank you very much for coming, joining us today and sharing your point of view. Anna, you have the floor for the rest.
Merci beaucoup, Arnaud.
Thank you, Arnaud.
Et merci surtout à nos points focaux nationaux avec lesquels nous avons travaillé tout au long de cette année et qui nous ont donné des exemples très pertinents dans la matière de transition qu'on essaye d'avancer tous ensemble. Merci énormément de votre collaboration et de vos exemples inspirants. Nous aimerions maintenant à présent tourner vers la perspective des acteurs et des organisations internationales et régionales qui font aussi énormément de travail dans cette matière, avec qui nous avons collaboré également et qui ont des points de vue à partager également. J'invite donc mon collègue Maximilian Jarrett, le responsable du programme Afrique à l'AIE, à prendre la parole pour modérer cette deuxième table ronde. Merci.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you, Arnaud, and thank you very much all the delegates from the focus countries who we just heard from in a very, very comprehensive session, looking at the perspectives from the national level. We turn now to more the regional, international level. And just to start this off, I just want to repeat what the vice minister from the Netherlands said earlier, I think, because it really can inform our discussion now. 3 things she said. Yes, we can. Yes, we should. This is a matter of choice. So I want our panelists to keep this in mind as they respond to some of the questions and the issues we're going to discuss in this session. And just to remind you again on the agenda, this session is going to be focusing on what are the Sahel as a region now, clean energy transitions investment needs, and how can they be mobilized? And to discuss that, I have a very esteemed panel here. I have with us Mr. Rashid Ali Abdallah, and he is the Executive Director of the African Energy Commission, AFREC. Also Ms. Ngong Diop, and she's the Director of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa's Sub-Regional Office for West Africa, based in Niamey, Niger. Also in Washington, D.C. is Mr. Kofi Akwevi, and he's the head of the energy sector subgroup of Alliance Sahel, based out of the World Bank. And in Morocco, we have Mr. Ali Zourali. He is the Director of International Cooperation and Business Development at Mazen, and Mazen stands for the Moroccan Agency for Sustainable Energy. And then also we have Mr. Nicolas Guichard. He's the Deputy Head of the Energy Unit at the French Development Agency. And last but not least, there's a good colleague for the African Development Bank, Dr. Daniel Schroff, and he's the advisor to the Vice President and Acting Director of Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency at the African Development Bank. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'd like to kick off with you, Rashid Abdallah. We've heard a lot from the national level in terms of the issues at stake, but based on what the Vice Minister said regarding yes, we can, yes, we should, and it's a matter of choice. From where you sit at AFRIC, what are the core investment needs? What is the key priority agenda? And also, having read our report, the key action points that are needed now to scale up investment for this region going forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Max, and I would like also to extend my thanks to His Excellency, the Minister of Energy of Senegal, and all the excellencies present here. And also, I would like also to thank EIA for taking initiative for having this report. Really, come back to your questions. I need to start with two main points. The point that renewable energy witness reduction, or we witness reduction of renewable energy dramatically. And the data show that between 2010 to 2019, the solar energy, the utility scale solar energy reduced by 82%. And this combined with the reduction of the utility scale storage. And this make the renewable energy, solar and wind with the storage in utility scale, it is most competitive to any conventional power generation, not only in Africa, but globally. And when we need to talk about energy transition in Africa, we need really to define what's the transition we need. Energy transition in Africa is not just about replacing polluting energy resources, but also, in fact, it is also to prevent the scenario in which the growing demand can meet by polluting fuel. Having said these two facts, it is very obvious that, or I can claim, renewable energy transition is in Sahel, it is already going on. Most of this country invest in renewable energy, and most of this country, they already built solar energy, or they plan to build solar energy. Therefore, I think, yes, we can, and we able, and we should do it. And also there are is very important fact also I need to highlight, the natural gas in that regions. We know in Africa in general, in the last 10 years, the most, or the 40% of new discovery of natural gas is happening in Africa. Of course, it's not only in Sahel region, but in different area. But we concern here about the new discovery in natural gas in Senegal and Mauritania, and in other area of Sahel regions. And this really natural gas, it could be enabler for energy transition. So natural gas can be enabler because they have a huge impact to meet the demand and increase energy access for clean energy, and they are help to build the energy system by clean energy. They also help to meet the demand for clean cooking. And of course, not all countries they have natural gas, but we can also promote to have cross-border trading in this commodity. So Sahel region, I believe they have this this potential to even accelerate. So I don't think that we need to say, okay, we need to start energy, but we need to accelerate the energy transition already started in this region. I think the investment in solar energy and wind energy also, it is a vital, and it is an international trend. And Africa, they have more advantage than other regions to proceed in that area. And the Sahel region particularly, they have really advantage in solar and wind energy. And if we combine by the reduction and the storage that I mentioned earlier, I think this more areas that we need to focus on. I think we can proceed on this, but maybe I will stop here and I can come back if when the discussion proceeds. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abdallah, for those introductory comments. I'd like to turn now to the Economic Commission for Africa and Ms. Diop. Ngon Diop, I'm just wondering, you've heard what Mr. Abdallah from the AU and Africa just said, but what are the UN and the Economic Commission for Africa's views on the immediate, so let's the short-term now priorities for this region in terms of energy transitions investments?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Allow me to thank the IEV for the invitation to ECA, but especially ECA West Africa region. And of course, all protocol observed, the Minister of Petroleum and Energy of Senegal, Her Excellency Sophie Clermont, and also the Vice Minister of International Cooperation, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Netherlands, Miss Kitty van der Heijden. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to join this meeting and then to address the question you have said, but there are 2 points I wanted to bring to bear. Number one is, yes, we can address it on the short term, but we do have to come up with a comprehensive, integrated approach that helps us to tackle the long term, the medium term, and the short term. And I think before even addressing the short term, we also have to bring the whole issue of investment required and addressing the investment required when it comes to clean energy transition, putting it in the framework, the landscape system we have right now on the continent and in the region. Number one, the key challenge we are facing when it comes to having the right mix of policies that will inform the short-term action is that we have policies and innovation, whereas we have already in the region very comprehensive framework when it comes to UNIS, the Sahel. UNIS is the United Nations Integrated Framework, which informs ECA, undertaken ECA support. It does have responses for the short term, medium term, and long term, and it influences action and also help to kind of assess the quick wins and responding to the short, medium term, and the long term. So what do I mean by that? Number one, there's a need, even in the short term, to actually understanding the clean energy transition as a key underpinning and enabling for the transformation of the Sahel. If we understand that it informs the national policies that we are actually supporting to domesticate UNIS, meaning the integrated framework, the Sahel development framework, and so on and so forth. Number two is to say, where are the key actors? And to me, we cannot at this instant, in the context we are in, no countries can actually address the issue of transition energy investment alone. We are bringing the systematic and the grouping of different countries, creating the connection between different countries, and the investment required and tailored to their need is critical. And in the short term, again, we can't do that by using, for example, in West Africa, because some of those countries are in Sahel, the West Africa Power Pool. There is a kind of framework and entry point to say, private sector, other actors in the public sector and in the private partnership can respond to number one, be able to have access to clean energy for the household, be able to have access to electricity for the rural area, and be able to mobilize pool of funds through that umbrella to be able to respond to those short, medium term, and long term. When it comes down to at national level, which is also the short term, it has also to be done in a way that the resource mobilization, meaning at national level, the way it is, the international economic and financial architecture does not allow to actually have, mobilize and harness international finance in a just new law. You need to bring it to the national level and harness and mobilize domestic finance. How? So number one, it shouldn't be responding to energy, clean energy, shouldn't be adding on. We do have a budget, we do have policy. We have to have the right number to cost what it takes to actually put it in the budget, public budget, bringing those actors in their contribution and ensuring we implement them as part and parcel of the national budget. I can give example of many countries, Senegal, which I know, but also other countries in the region, Côte d'Ivoire. They are trying to do so. In so doing, supporting the farmers, supporting the small producer to actually start having access to that clean energy, supporting households by allocating resources in the budget, to be able to actually not only subsidize, but support the poor to actually break the energy poverty cycle. Because when you say energy and clean energy, you're referring also ipso facto to that kind of challenges, which is the energy and poverty. So to speak, the short term can only be dealt with if the long term and the policy, the mix policy, the set of policy is right, and the integrating approach is right, bearing in mind that energy cannot be dealt with in isolation, is part and parcel of the whole policy framework, be it national and regional. Let me put there, and there are entry points already there, and countries are using them.
Thank you, and Ms. Chop, I'll come back to you on one particular issue because I also want us to hear about the gender dimension of all of this. But before we get back to that, we've heard about the continental framework from Abdallah. We've heard about the policies, but now let's talk about money, because in the presentation, in the report, we show the scale of investment that's needed to really achieve the Africa case. Kofi Ekwevi, you're at the World Bank, you're at the Alliance Sahel. What are the numbers? And having read our report, how are we going to make this happen? The minister said it's a choice. So how can it happen?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm very happy to be part of this panel. In terms of where we're going forward with investment, I would just like to point out that as part of the Sahel Alliance, we have estimated that it would take about $9 billion to double access by 2023 in the Sahel, G5 Sahel countries. And I'm happy to report that so far we have mobilized about $5.5 billion towards that. So work is ongoing as part of the Sahel Alliance. We have about 63 projects that are in the energy sector, 43 in implementation now, and about 15 under preparation. But the challenge is usually on having the right enabling environment to reform and also to implement the project. Later on, I would like to emphasize that we have different type of instruments, whether it's budget support or direct investment operations at the level of the World Bank. And the Sahel partners also, some of them are on this panel, also have a lot of resources and instruments that they're targeting towards that. I'll stop here and pick up later on.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to turn to Morocco, to Mr. Ali Zarouali of Mazen. Mazen has been very successful in this field in North Africa and in Morocco, but I also know that you're also very active in the Sahel. So based on what you've heard, based on what you know, based on our report, Mr. Zarouali, what are your perspectives on the investment, the scaling up, the bringing together a range of partners, private and public sector and so forth, to get this done in the Sahel?
Thank you for your invitation. I think that Mrs. Diop addressed all the main obstacles that need to be tackled in order to facilitate and to accelerate the development of access to energy in the Sahel. For me, if we want to make that possible and to accelerate this dynamic, we need to focus on a pentagon of 5 main axes. So what we see globally is that there is a lack of a clear legal framework. Many times there is the official legal framework and there is the non-official one. And the result is that we have too many projects that are under development in some countries, and the grid can't support all this development of projects. So we need to have a very clear legal framework that gives comfort and to the private sector. Secondly, we need a strong vision, what we want to do. And I can mention here, and Daniel will also talk about this, Desert to Power, which is an initiative sponsored by IFDB, who is doing a very great and important work by designing and conceiving all the roadmaps for either the regional roadmaps and the countries roadmap that will give this vision and give more transparency to the private sector. What we need also, and based on the experience of Morocco, and this is something very important to us that hasn't been evocated here, is a leadership. What we see in all the countries that are developing some specific renewable energy projects, all the projects that are reaching the financial close are projects that are sponsored by the highest level of the state. Because basically there are too many institutions that are implicated on these projects. They don't have always the same objectives or the same interests. So by having this leadership at the highest level of the state, we work in tackling all this kind of administrative obstacles, and we accelerate the process of developing projects. There is also a lack of know-how, and this is where we need more cooperation, multilateral cooperation. And what I am a very good advocate of the South-South cooperation, basically because we have Southern countries that have been through all this process, so they have experience. They meet the same challenges as all the Southern countries. So we need to give them the opportunity to share their experience to less advanced Southern countries in order to not reinvent the wheel each time and to share all the best practices that have worked on the ground. So these are globally my views about the main obstacles, how we could accelerate this. And initiatives like Desert to Power, or like the initiative that we are leading also with the ISDB, besides the fact that we are involved in Desert to Power also, which targets to accompany several countries in the Sahel to develop specific projects based on renewable energy technologies. For example, we can mention Niger, but there are many others like Senegal also and Mauritania that are concerned by this kind of initiative. This kind of initiative that are mainly based on the South-South cooperation are the ones that we need in order to accelerate the sharing of experience and to accelerate the process of developing renewable energy facilities that will facilitate the universal access to electricity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. O'Reilly, for those very welcome and comprehensive introductory comments on the question. Before we've heard a lot about Desert to Power. We'll be coming to Daniel shortly. Before that, I want to go to Mr. Nicolas Guichard of the Agence France de Développement, because he was nodding a lot during when Mr. O'Reilly was speaking. I want to throw this question to you. We've heard a lot about the priorities for investment and legal frameworks and so forth, but I'm just like to know your perspective on, in terms of investment planning, how one packages the new money that needs to come at scale for this region. What your thoughts are, what's needed there, please.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais y aller en français si ça vous va.
Thank you. I will speak French if this is okay, because I know there are many French speakers with us today. And first, I'd like to thank you and the IAA for the quality of this report. It's a very rich report. And we also had very interesting discussions today. There are many topics that we might be able to talk about during this roundtable, especially when it comes to the priority in fundings. But if you want to talk about planification, I think it's a major challenge, and we have been working on this in various countries, and we will be able to do it in the next few years. Planification must be done at various levels. You can see in the report that was published today, we're thinking at the scale of various countries in the Sahel region, within the energy sector in the broader sense. There is some planning in terms of energy, but also an analysis on the socioeconomic impact of the energy transition. So this is essential, and this type of analysis can be done at the level of a country or a region, and it gives a long-term vision of the pathways and the main gaps that exist and the efforts that must be done to tackle these challenges. I think it's extremely important, and I think that this work that has been done for the Sahel region will be done also for each country. We personally will be working with Mauritania on long-term perspectives, but there's also work to be done at the level of the power grid sector in all countries. For instance, there must be roadmap for production, transportation, and distribution of power, but there are also regional frameworks. There are roadmaps that are extremely important to have a vision of the various relationships that exist between various markets in different countries. And all of this is essential to have a good transition. And we need to play on the strengths of each country that is involved in such a project. And so this is also important for the topic of access to electricity, which is one of the main topics of the report today. Countries that have already started to have integrated planification for access to electricity have been looking at all available technologies, have been working with all stakeholders, with all agencies to expand their grids, because as we've seen, the main grid will account for at least half of the new connections that will be implemented in the next few years. And so they need to work with utilities that will be in charge of expanding the grids, but also with stakeholders that are looking at home systems, for instance, and they also need to make sure that there is enough flexibility to adjust for the evolution in technologies, that can actually change the share of a specific technology in the energy production and energy mix. And so I know that the IEA has been working a great deal on training people in each country. This is a key topic. It is essential to have good planification in the long run and to streamline everything in the long run. But I think it is a key issue. I think that donors have been coordinating increasingly. Kofi has already mentioned the Sahel Alliance, and in this area and through the major initiatives that have been mentioned, and we are actually participating in these initiatives with the AFD, many discussions are necessary to have better coordination, especially when it comes to planification and funding. This will make it possible to make sure that in each country or for the whole region, everything is done and updated with a financial partner and while avoiding redundancy and similar projects. So planification is extremely important for this sector.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Mr. Guichard. I'd really like now to turn to the African Development Bank and Daniel Schroff. We started with AU, AFREC. Now we've gone through everyone now with the ADB. It's the continent's premier Pan-African financing institution. A lot has been said, Daniel. Also, Desert to Power came up a few times in the comments so far. I'd like to hear from you now. Two things. First of all, how the ADB is positioned to respond to some of the investment challenges that we outline in the report, but then also the particular role that the Desert to Power initiative is playing to take this forward now.
Thank you very much, Max. It's always an advantage intervening at last because a lot of aspects have already been highlighted by previous speakers. But let me at the outset just highlight thank, in fact, the International Energy Agency for having undertaken this very important study and for associating the African Development Bank to this seminar to discuss some of the pertinent findings. Indeed, several previous speakers have highlighted the Desert to Power initiative, which is a flagship initiative that the African Development Bank initiated, but it's very much a partnership with many of the institutions also connected here on the seminar, covering the 11 countries of the Sahel from Senegal in the west all the way to Eritrea and Djibouti in the east. However, we have a particular focus in the initial period on the Sahel G5 countries, and that's of course directly relevant to a lot of the analysis that has been undertaken by the IEA in this report. I think here it's important to highlight that we secured this very high-level political mandate from the heads of state. So there's a clear leadership from the heads of state towards the vision of Desert to Power, seizing that enormous solar potential that the Sahel, that the G5 Sahel in particular have in order to foster socioeconomic development. A commitment that was in fact reiterated in the latest extraordinary summit in July this year. The second is that with the countries, we've been working over the last year on planning documents, the National Desert to Power roadmaps that try to identify what are sort of the targets in terms of solar generation investments, in terms of the necessary transmission grid interconnection investments that are needed, in terms of decentralized energy access, and all the associated accompanying reforms, as well as working on a regional roadmap that's trying to identify what are some of the priorities, challenges that are best addressed at the regional level to complement the work at the national level. And I think here I would just like to give one or two sort of elements of that and link it also to the report of the International Energy Agency. And you mentioned the Africa case. And I was very pleased to see that, in fact, the Africa case put a very ambitious target, just looking at solar generation capacity of 8 gigawatt by 2030. That, in fact, the National Desert to Power roadmaps for the G5 Sahel, which of course does not include Senegal, which will come on top, already have identified and validated by the countries targets in excess of 3.5 gigawatts, with projects already identified by the countries well in excess of 2.5 gigawatts. So we have some 85 priority projects that have come out of this roadmap process. Not all of them are solar generation, there are also on the other Desert to Power priorities. But that's a clear indication that already with these kind of commitments taken by the countries, it's a very important step towards realizing the Africa case that the IEA has pointed out. I would, however, like to highlight one aspect that has not been touched on in a lot of detail by the previous speakers. And then looking at some of these projects that have been identified, we noticed very quickly that more than 2/3 of these projects are still at a very early stage. So there is a lot of requirement, a lot of need for project preparation funding on the one side. So really undertaking the required studies, but also in terms of then developing these projects in a way that also the private sector can invest in some of these opportunities. So that requires considerable amount of funding. We from our side are mobilizing some of the instruments that we have at our disposal, such as our Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa, but we're also trying to bring all the other partners that we are cooperating with in the context of Desert to Power to the table so that we can multiply the funding, really making an impact for the countries. A second aspect, and just what I want to highlight is, and I alluded to it earlier, is that regional dimension. And that's, of course, also an aspect that's coming out very clearly from the report around the need of investments in interconnections, investments in the national grids, so that they can absorb, integrate more variable renewable energy, particularly from solar, but of course not exclusively. The same applies to wind and other intermittent technologies. And in that context, the regional roadmap of Desert to Power highlighted 4 priorities. I would just like to highlight 2. One is indeed these large-scale regional solar parks. Some of them are already under development in the context of West African Power Pool with the support of the World Bank and others. And a second one is indeed to support and finance some of these critical interconnections. There are already several projects underway, whether that's a Guinea-Mali, the North Core, a Chad Cameroon, which is critical for Chad to be able to expand its solar generation capacity. But in addition to that, we have in Desert to Power identified a serious gap on the transmission side. We've been working with the West African Power Pool, and we've added a project that we call the Sahel Transmission Backbone, that would in fact connect all the G5 Sahel countries. And we've just been able to mobilize funding from the African Development Bank, which will be implemented with the West African Power Pool to undertake these important pre-feasibility studies for the Sahel transmission backbone. And importantly here as well, we were able to secure formal mandates from both Mauritania and Chad for the West African Power Pool to undertake this work, and has to be taken into account, of course, that neither of these 2 countries are members of the West African Power Pool. So I think those are some of the examples of the important work that we collectively, with the leadership of the countries, are undertaking. Let me stop here, but I can come back maybe later a bit more on the financing side and some of the exciting tools that we have at our disposal, resources we're trying to mobilize. Thank you, Max.
Thank you very much. Let me turn again to where we started with, to Rashid Abdallah, because we heard talk there about the regional dimension in the Africa case, which of course is linked to the Agenda 2063. Rashid, and when we're talking about regional collaboration, I'm wondering from where you are at AFREC, you know, the AU, how could regional cooperation be enhanced to really play a role in accelerating the needed investment? What's your perspective on that? Can't hear you, Rashid. Please, you need to unmute.
Yeah. Thank you very much. As I mentioned, that thank you for all the speakers that they put more emphasis on this regional cooperation, and I think this is very important in terms of pooling resource, and also the countries they can share this resource, and this will reduce the cost of the investment, and also when they meet the same demand. In Africa, we are always trying to promote this regional cooperation, because we believe that we can meet our target with less cost, with less effort. And even for African Union, I think most of you know that they launched this single Africa energy market, single electricity market, which really is the main idea is to enhance this regional cooperations. We cannot develop ourselves as island, but we can develop ourselves as a collective effort. And this means that we need to put more emphasis in transmission lines, the interconnections, and also pooling the resource between our country. Not only that, actually, but actually is a cross-border capacity building. So we feel that, okay, now our system is developing, but we need also, what is missing is how to build our capacity. And actually, countries, they can learn from each other. And I think the good example is Mazin from Morocco. Mazin, it is just a Moroccan company, but I think they put their expertise for the other region, which actually it is a good example for regional cooperations. And the other area for regional cooperation and also to enhance this, accelerate this movement, it is the investment itself. So we can just try to mobilize the resource available in the continent to invest on other country. We know there are some issue according to regularity, which the previous speaker talked about. We need to put the right regularity body so that this investment can come from Africa, from other country, from the neighbor country. And I think this area, it is something we need to work on. And Africa is also, we are all our program built on these cooperations because we feel that it is something we need to invest on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rashid. I'd like to turn to Ms. Diop now again. There was something I was mentioning earlier regarding the equity issues related to scaling up investment and the challenges that we mentioned in the report. I know you have a lot of expertise in gender, women's empowerment, and so forth. But so I'm wondering what your thoughts are regarding what we mentioned in the report regarding clean cooking investments and so forth, and what kind of new modalities can be brought to bear to meet that financing gap.
Thank you very much. I think your report has actually analyzed it very well, especially page 57, 58, etc. The mega trend we are seeing is that investment in clear cooking energy is actually lagging behind. And I think in the Sahel, apart from Senegal and Mauritania, all the countries are actually in red when it comes to addressing that component. What happened is a lot of impact in inequality, a lot of impact on the gender, poverty, and energy nexus. So for example, Energia has released a very empirical study, taking the case study of South Africa. A woman can spend easily between 15 and 20 kilometers per day just to collecting firewood. 90%, and this is also your report, which is, I take the opportunity to say a very, very comprehensive report indeed, based on data, etc. So your report has also confirmed that 90% of the house, 90 million, out of the 900 million actually use traditional biomass. This has impact, economic impact, but it does also have impact on the whole inequality. When it comes also of the trade-off, we know the economic impact for women, for girls, the health impact, and so on and so forth. The health impact is actually very glaring, and right now 4 million per year actually died out of, because of the indoor pollution related to the biomass. So what does it mean? It means there is an imperative from the economic point of view, but more importantly, imperative from the health and the point of view. So what do we need to do? For me, there are two things. Initially, the first and important thing is first and foremost understanding the kind of time, budget time, when it comes to really understanding what kind of information you need to put in your macroeconomy. I'm talking about from the macro perspective. And what we see now is that all the allocation we're doing, even in terms of the expenses, in estimating the cost, investment in clean energy, they don't actually take into account the accurate information that can, let's say, allocate the appropriate and adequate resources to clean energy, like access to gas, access to clean gas, access to so on. So what happened is we're still using the system of national account in a very mainstream manner, which actually overlook those aspects. So I believe your report provides insight into what needs to be done from the macroeconomic planning point of view. You can just come and invest in responding to the clean energy if you don't have the number. Number one, what do we need and how do we reach those women and those girls and even the men and the boys who actually do not have access to clean energy? Most of them, 95% are in the rural area. Sometimes even 90 or 75 depending on the country. How do we access to them in terms of equipment? How do we train them to be able to have, when they have access to the different programs like Senegal, Mauritania, there was a subsidy The government allocate resources based on a very comprehensive data-informed, evidence-informed policy framework and policy measure, and then put it in their budget to actually reach out to between 60 or 65, and the data continue increasing. So it is possible to do that. It is possible by saying, this is the end result we would like to achieve. Your report to show the kind of framework and the end result that and target by countries. But that is the plan. We've seen a disconnect from the macroeconomic point of view, from the public finance point of view, between those very targets and the actual implementation of those policies. So the result is, yes, the targets are there. They will be renewed each day, but we don't see a result, and we can't even harness the low-hanging fruit. It just to take for government, based on that framework, if it is well defined, allocated resources to be able to reach out to, let's say, 20% of those who don't have access to clean cooking energy per year, depending on their framework of meeting the target, to be able to increase the number from year 1 to year 10. It is not happening. Is it possible to do it? Yes, because if you compare with the investment and the kind of stride made in terms of electricity, access to electricity, Senegal is a good case, 70%, 78%. But the same effort have not been done when it comes, their effort, but not at the equal, at the level of the investment and effort that has made to actually accelerate. So they should be done simultaneously because they are mutually reinforcing. So to speak, have the right term of policy in the framework, understanding who does not have access to that, with the focus of the household, with the focus of the small clean farmers, etc., in the very remote area. I'm not talking only the urban, because the urban-rural divide does have impact in the way in which government tackle those issues. And what I've seen, and I'm going to end there, what I've seen is twofold. I've seen in the Sahel region that, yes, sometimes there's a mismatch between the policy priorities that derive from the deep and in-depth analysis, which in-depth analysis define the target and the objective for, let's say, in the medium term and long term, and what actually is going on the ground, what actually action and programs are going on. Sometimes there's a lot of money, and I was telling that sometimes it's a waste of money. I don't want to name countries, but I'm seeing experience where countries made a lot of investment, according to the papers, endorsed by parliament, but you will see the result is not sustainable, right? The result is like, you can have some things, a few rural area, villages, and even some remote area or excluded in the cities that have access to some gas, clean energy for some time, but it's not sustainable. So the framework is not comprehensive enough to connect the dot and to say, if my policy is and my target are there, and I'm implementing this from my budget, mobilizing from my budget based on what I've said, what should I do to actually take stock and take them further? How can I reinforce and sustain the milestone? How can I harness those kind of pocket of money in such as the budget? If you look at the budget, for instance, you will see there are possibility there. So that is the possibility. What do we do to make sustainable the kind of initiatives that are going on? How do we respond and implement the target? And the whole policy evaporation around the clean energy. You have policy, you have an adding on. There's a lot of disconnect when it comes to the comprehensive. So I think those are the kind of imperative we have to have if we are to respond to, that critical need, which can hamper the whole development prospect. And right now in the COVID-19 era, I'm seeing the trend that the situation will hamper the recovery agenda. And that's what I will leave there, COVID recovery agenda. It's becoming worse because of also that. Because of the financial
Thank you very much, Ms. Diop. You've been very, very clear. Some key words there, and I just wanted you to hold that because the discussion is heating up now. I want to turn to Kofi Okwevi based on what you said. Issues regarding implementation, the mismatch between the framework and so forth. So I know the Alliance Sahel is doing work around technical studies and so forth. How can you respond to what she said, Kofi or Kwevi, in terms of moving forward and how these issues are being addressed regarding implementation?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think to be very clear, there's a lot of resources that are already committed to energy access, but we are not seeing some of these projects being implemented as fast as we would have liked to, for various reasons. I think we do have a capacity issue in the G5 Sahel countries that we have to address. We are working on it with our partners. There is a need to continue building a capacity to design and implement projects. So I would like to say that it's not only financing issue, it is also a capacity issue, and those you have to be addressing these issues at the same time. From what I'm hearing, if I give an example for clean cooking, for example, we have at the World Bank a 500 million clean cooking fund. I'm informing, and I know many people know about it. And this is already resources there for clean cooking that can be used by the G5 Sahel countries and Senegal. So we have a situation where if you don't have the enabling conditions on the ground, implementation will not go very fast. Let me backtrack and then give some examples. I think we have situations where you have to work on strategies, policies, regulatory environments to actually attract the necessary financing that is going to move implementation forward. Private sector operators come if there are very clear rules of the game. They want to know what is going to be their return on investment and what it is that they have to do to actually push their ventures in these countries. If they don't see these signs in the regulatory rules of the government, they don't come as fast as we would have liked to. We also need to apply discipline in selection of projects. I'll give an example. In many of our countries, you have a lot of IPPs, and you have also the need to work more with putting competition forward in selecting a project. I'll give an example. You can give the example of the Senegal solar auction that have actually attracted a lot of private operators, and they have had a competitive price. If you go in a sole sourcing and then a deal, you might not have this level of prices. So implementation, yes, but creating the environment to have implementation take place, having the necessary capacity on the ground to implement project is necessary.
Thank you very much. We're nearly running out of time for this session. So for my next three interveners, I want to just ask you for your comments, if you can be brief, please, regarding issues around the enabling environment and capacity moving forward, especially how that relates to the recommendations of our report, what needs to happen. First of all, Ali Zeroual, you're not only at Mazen, I know that you're also the Vice President of the Africa Commission of the General Confederation of Moroccan Enterprises. So enabling environment is something key for you, I know, as you try and invest in Africa. What are your thoughts on that? And from that, after you, we'll then turn to Daniel, Mr. Guichard, and then to Daniel to close. So you have the floor, please, Ali Zeroual.
Thank you again. I think it's an important question that we need to put in the context of the clean energy transition. When we talk about clean energy transition, we most of the time we talk about the access to energy, and we forget that it's a great opportunity for African countries and African private sector to gain in terms of competitiveness. And I explain myself. Today in Africa, if we look at all the obstacles that aren't permitting the right development of the private sector of an industry in Africa, we will see that there are three main bottlenecks. The first one is the lack of good infrastructure to transform things and to export goods. The second one is the lack of know-how. And the third one, which is very important, is the lack of a sustainable energy that is competitive. Today, Africa is paying the electricity with the most expensive price, while Africa is hosting tremendous potential in terms of renewable energy, and we see that either based on wind, solar, or hydro, African countries can produce electricity with a very low price that is below 5 cents the kilowatt hour, if the financings and the rate of the financings are also competitive and are following. So I think that for Africa, the energy transition is also an opportunity to stimulate the private sector in terms of investment in industrial processes and not only in renewable energy facilities. And using the electricity from renewable energy with a very competitive price to produce goods in Africa instead of exporting materials and importing finished goods. Maybe the figure that is the most shocking is that less than 2% of the African raw materials are transformed in Africa. And with the competitiveness that is bringing renewable energy, for example, and all this clean energy transition, I think that Africa should think and will think to shift toward more industrialization using this green energy in the process of transformation to accelerate the social, economical, and industrial development of our countries. This is maybe my will, but I think that it's feasible and it's something that is feasible in the short and medium term.
Not just your will, my will, and also the minister was saying it earlier, we can and we should. Turning to you now, Mr. Guichard, what are your thoughts on capacity and neighboring environment? Also, he mentioned private sector, but the blend between private and public finance moving forward, please.
Merci beaucoup. Il reste peut-être peu de temps, alors je vais peut-être...
Thank you so much. We have little time, so I will concentrate on the topic of capacity building. Of course, when you read the report drafted by the IEA and the importance of investment to be put into projects, and that we've been working for a long time in the field with power generating companies and other agencies, we can see that for some of them, the ranking up of the past few years and going from just a few projects with a few donors to roll out is a real challenge now. Now that they're ranking up, it's a challenge in terms of internal capabilities, of outsourcing and training the people, because they don't necessarily have the right technicians and engineers in the country. So, of course, there's capacity building and training of the staff already there, providing them professional training in the country. There's a real gap there. We worked a lot with Decile and their teams. So we carried out many workshops to think about human resources, how things could be done. Niger, in 10 years already, has increased their activity in quite a spectacular way. Now I have quite a few of them in connection with quite a few networks of donors today. It was difficult for them to change the internal organization, to manage the different procedures of call for changes and all of that. And so we worked with them and we supported them in their internal organization, their capacity building, and their hiring processes. We have difficulties in Mauritania with Samalek, and other donors do so too. It's a key issue. The capacity for absorption is a major issue. I mean, we can't possibly imagine absorb the funding. I mean, I can't remember the order of magnitude. I think it was 3 billion per year in the next 10 years. in view of the existing players in the field. I mean, there's a rule for rural areas having access to all of this. These agencies find it even more difficult because they don't have the human skills. It's difficult for them to protect themselves in the field and to live up to all of this. So there are difficulties in terms of human resources for those operators. They also need to learn natural operators. They need to work with private players to deal with more contractual matters, legal matters. This means that the business is changing. They need to learn about new technologies. This is the major issue that we're trying to address. Maybe in the coordination bodies, whether inter-country dialogues or discussions between donors or with the Sahel Alliance, maybe we should put this topic or this issue higher on the agenda alongside funding and regulatory frameworks, because I certainly think that the ability to absorb this funding and to organize things in the field is a major issue that needs to be addressed one way or another, so that we can think about receiving investments that are in line with what is mentioned in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guichard. Daniel Schroff, the last word, not for today, but on the panel, this session goes to you. Please be brief. I know there's a lot to say, but your final comments in terms of what we've heard, what's missing maybe, or the key priorities going forward now on this agenda.
Thank you very much, Max. So just to highlight maybe 2-3 aspects or reinforce. One is, and Nicolas alluded to it, is of course the situation of the utilities in those countries, both in terms of the capacity strengthening dimension, but also obviously utility reform goes beyond the strengthening of capacities, that touches on questions such as governance, that touches on the whole technical and agenda of reducing of technical commercial losses. So there are many aspects to the utility reform that obviously cannot be addressed in the short term, but is a key priority also in terms of being able to attract more private sector investments, because for most of these solar IPPs, of course, the utility is the off-taker. And the reality is that as an off-taker, those utilities are not bankable. And this is why there is a significant need for guarantees and other mechanisms to make sure that the private sector can invest. So I think maybe the last point, and I know we are running out of time, is really that we need to increase the availability of guarantee funding. On our side, we are just working with the Green Climate Fund, and hopefully we have next week an approval at the GCF board for a Desert to Power financing facility, which would include as one key aspect a partial risk guarantee, which would accompany the bank's partial risk guarantee related to solar IPPs in the G5 Sahel countries as one element that will help to bring in more private sector investments, while we're working on the more long-term reform of the utilities, so that ultimately the utilities can be bankable themselves, so there will not be a need anymore for these type of guarantees. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you for being brief. I want to thank you and also Nicolas Guichard, Ali Zarwali, Kofi Ekwevi, Ngong Diop, and Rashid Ali Abdallah. You've shared such great insights with us today, and look forward to continuing this discussion with you in other fora and into the future. Thank you very much. It's just time left now for me to hand over back to my colleague, Anna, who will take on the proceedings from here. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Maximilien, et merci bien évidemment à tous nos intervenants pour leurs propos très pertinent pour bien souligner cette perspective régionale et internationale. Nous allons clôturer cet événement. Pour la clôture de cet événement, nous aimerions nous tourner vers l'un des principaux partenaires de l'AIE, à savoir l'Union africaine, la Commission de l'Union africaine, avec son directeur du département d'infrastructure et d'énergie, M. Atef Marzouk. Monsieur Marzouk, la parole est à vous.
Mr. Atef Marzouk, you have the floor.
Thank you, Anna. Excellency Minister, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. The closing session by both the African Union and the International Energy Agency. So let me take this opportunity to address some of the African Union Commission Department of Infrastructure and Energy activities that support our African continent, and Ms. Rebecca to conclude the main outcomes of today's dialogue. Let me start by thanking the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy of Senegal and the IEA for inviting the African Union Commission to this year's Sahel Dialogue, Regional Dialogue on Energy Transition. This dialogue timely as it aims to exploring policies, best practices, and regional cooperation for accelerating energy transition in Sahel region. The African Union Commission has been working towards the harmonization of the regulatory framework for the electricity sector since 2015, with financial and technical support from the European Union Technical Assistance Facility. Some significant milestones have been achieved, including the development of a strategy and action plan with implementation concluded in launch of Africa Single Electricity Market in June 2021 and the ongoing Continental Power System Master Plan under the coordination of Audanibat. I am also pleased to inform you that the African Union Commission has developed guidelines for the policy and the technical models for mini-grid development, including guidelines for addressing relevant issues facing mini-grid development, such what to do when the grid arrives or how to compensate developer when their concession area are taken up by the grid and the different methodologies for setting mini-grid tariff. These are useful tools that we are placing in the hand of member states to support their regulatory capacity. In addition, the African Union Commission has promoting the development of specific renewable energy resources with view to accelerate their uptake. In this regard, the Africa Bioenergy Policy Framework and the guidelines were developed to spur investment in the bioenergy sector. Similar efforts have been made towards other resources such as small hydropower and solar. We hope to expand this to cover wind. For geothermal development, the African Union Commission has teamed up with several partners to set up facilities that support the project developers during the early and the most risky part of the project cycle by awarding them grant to finance certain aspects of the work. This has been steady growth in the investment in the geothermal project across more member states in East African region. So far, 37 projects have been supported with the grant of $125 million, leveraging investment of nearly $10 billion for 3,500 mega of generation. Let me stop here and thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Marzouk, pour vos remarques de clôture. Pour maintenant vraiment clôturer cet événement,
Thank you so much, Mr. Marzouk, for your closing remarks. Now, in order to conclude the event, I'm now going to give the floor to Ms.
la
Rebecca
chef de
Gaghan,
l'Europe, du Moyen-Orient, de
the
l'Afrique et de l'Amérique latine au département de
the
relations
Middle
énergétiques
East,
mondiales
Latin
à l'AIE.
America, for Latin
Madame Gaghan,
Energy,
la
and
parole est à vous pour les
the
remarques de clôture. Merci.
Agency. Madame Gaghan, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. And I'd like to say a couple words in French to start.
Bonjour, je vais commencer en français.
Nous voudrions vous remercier pour votre participation aujourd'hui.
We'd like to thank you for your participation today.
Très fier d'avoir accueilli un public
IEA is very proud of having grouped together such a diverse and experienced group to discuss the subjects of the energy transition in the Sahel. We would particularly like to thank our partner from the Ministry of Oil and Energy of Senegal and also the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, who have helped us a great deal in these endeavors. And now I shall continue in English.
I also would like to thank our panelists. In our first panel, we heard from our 6 colleagues with whom we've been working from the 6 countries that were the focus of this report. And I come away really inspired to see all of the activity that is underway, but also to thank them for their inputs, because without their contributions, this report would not have been possible. I only regret that we couldn't all be in Senegal, because I feel we have many more questions and many more topics to discuss. I also want to thank the participants in our second panel, who raised a lot of really interesting issues, but also show the great attention and efforts that are already underway across the Sahel region. We are very pleased to have the opportunity to work with all of you and hope that this will continue. And many of you also contributed to our report, and we appreciate that very much. As our Deputy Executive Director highlighted earlier, Africa's energy future is becoming increasingly pivotal to the world. This is why at the IEA, we have been significantly expanding our engagement across the region, and are particularly pleased to have been able to work in the Sahel. This is the first time we have focused on this region, and we hope that this is just the start of closer and continuing engagement. The event that took place today is a good example of the type of work that we hope to continue in the future. The IEA is also increasingly focused on clean energy transitions, and this topic has become a global priority. One of the panelists mentioned that countries can learn from each other, and that is one element that we see as essential in our role. We seek to support countries as they accelerate progress on their transition pathways. But one of the points that I take away from our discussions today, certainly in the Sahel region and many others, these pathways not only need to be inclusive, but in this case, lead very quickly to universal energy access, also that is affordable. It is in this spirit of engagement that we pulled together this event today. We hope that not only this discussion, but also the report will help support your efforts for cleaner, reliable, and affordable energy across the region. While our approach in this particular report has been regional, we also hope that on the national level, we will be able to continue to engage with all of you. At the IEA, our fundamental goal is to enable policymakers and decision makers to build energy systems that are sustainable for tomorrow, that bring clean, affordable, and efficient energy. We look forward to working with all of you to achieve this. Implementation came up today, capacity. We want to support this and contribute. On that note, I wish to thank again all of our partners and all of you for joining us. Thank you, and I hope that the next time we meet, it will be in person. Thank you.